no one was talking about this. And again, as I said, maybe it was naive of me. No one young goes through grief, because grief is a and again, this I say this because I don't think it's not what is a middle age, not a middle age problem, but it's not a problem that young people have to do. But that's not how it works. And and of course, like, you both lost your mums in your 30s, so I guess, would you there's probably like some similarities there, with you both, and it's funny because before, like, I actually kind of got into um like listen to your podcast and read your content. I actually thought you two were like sisters, because it's like your
Oh, I love that.
it's like your friendship is just like, it's so organic, and obviously it's unfortunate how you two came about, but I was just like, you just seem so like genuine amongst
Oh,
each
Thank you.
other.
Thank you. And right back at you guys. I feel like we've got very similar stories how our podcast actually came about, don't we, Sal?
definitely. And I think what you guys are doing in particular, like, men especially don't talk about their feelings as much, do they? Or grief. And I think the fact that you guys are being so open and honest and vulnerable and have created a platform where it's okay,
Yeah.
as blokes, to talk about what's going on and grief and all of the sort of messiness that comes with it, and I really respect you for that. And I really thought it was really interesting, your perspective on like being desensitized or maybe drained by the top, like by grief, because sometimes I think we can feel a bit desensitized to it, and especially I think when we're in the space where we're talking about it a lot, we kind of almost like live and breathe grief in a way. It's quite a lot, isn't it? You can almost feel like that might just be, sometimes you just need to step away from grief in a way. You could kind of become, I think, a little bit desensitized to it sometimes.
Yeah.
By the way, I'm really sorry if you can hear this weird noise. My dog
we can hear it.
snoring. Can you hear it? So it's not me. I'm not like farting or anything. It's my dog snoring.
I thought, is it me? But I was
No.
What's that sound?
he's really loud, so I'm gonna mute myself and just chime in. But yeah, he's really loud. I'm like nudging him, but it's not stopping.
No, but yeah, so I just like I know you guys have kind of spoken about probably numerous times and before, like in terms of, like I said to you, it was like seeing you both. It seems like, the content you guys produce and how you guys communicate with each other, like, it's so like nice to see. And again, someone who didn't know any better, would think, oh, maybe you two are, like, just because, like, it's like your stories are so much, I won't say identical, but it's like that sort of like both that sudden loss. But just sort of briefly kind of just explain like how you both sort of met each other, and how, or I would say, not say why, but yeah, how you decided to kind of create this like platform together and really just start, normalizing grief in your own way.
Well, it's a bit of a love story. Sal and I met. It came from tragedy, obviously, after our mums both died suddenly. But I think, like you and Ben, we sort of felt like no one else was going through it around us, and we felt really quite isolated with it. So we had found a support group, which we are so unlike support group type of people. It's not something that we would ever think that we'd be kind of throwing ourselves into, but we did feel really alone. And yeah, like you mentioned before, we sort of assumed that we'd have our mums into our 50s and 60s, and we were in absolutely no way prepared to be losing them at such a young age. And so we went to this support group meetup, and we both got there, and it didn't really feel like our jam when we got there, but I just felt a connection to Sal because her mum had died suddenly as well, and they're different circumstances which we'll go into, but I just felt like she would understand kind of where I was at. We were similar ages. We both lived in Sydney. Losing your mum is just, it's all sorts of awful, as you know. So yeah, I sent her a message just randomly. I think it was like a few days after or something. I was thinking about it. I was like, should I reach out? And yeah, I just put myself out there and said, hey, my mum's dead too. You want to catch up? And she responded, and then, yeah, we just hit it off straight away.
And we We basically became like friends really quickly. It was just so good having like that person. And you probably find, Jermaine, it's the same with you and Ben. Like, you just having that friend who understands, or that person who understands kind of grief and kind of all the crazy things that come with it, you know, like all the feelings, but then also the other things like the physical symptoms, the exhaustion, like the anxiety, you know, all of the things that you don't necessarily, people who haven't been through it, as great friends as they are, like even they could be like so supportive and your best mates, but they just might not understand like the complexities and the things that you're going through. And it was just so good to have like someone that understood it. And we just basically, we were talking about like how lonely we found it as well. Like, and even though we had like really good support around us, we just found it to be a really isolating experience. So that's kind of when we decided like, well, what can we do to help other people feel like less alone in their grief? And in Australia, I think in the UK, there's a bit more of a kind of a groundswell of like grief kind of conversations happening. There's, you know, loads of amazing podcasts like yours and Grief Gang and Griefcast, and you've got like the, you know, like it's quite a few kind of the grief case, all that stuff happening. But in Australia, there wasn't heaps, was there? There's not like a lot of support, and so we were kind of like, well, we struggled to find resources here that were basically like telling it how it is with grief, but also with a bit of humor, you know, like a lot of the resources over here were quite sort of, they felt quite outdated. So we're like, let's have a chat and start a podcast and just let's like, you know, just give it a go and see if we can help other people feel like less alone and maybe seen and heard in their grief. Because I think sometimes if you haven't got someone to talk to, you might be like, is what I'm feeling even normal, you know?
Yeah, like, am I going crazy? Because you feel like you're abnormal, you feel like you're losing your mind. Like, grief is so complex, and until you're in it, you have no idea what is normal and what's not. So yeah, just having like someone to kind of finish your sentences and make you feel like everything that you're thinking and feeling is okay and normal is just so valuable when you're grieving.
Yeah, I think definitely. And I think what you said, Sally, is because that like there's a lot of things when you think of grief, you think of, you know, traditional things that people have meetings, but being in this sort of space of social media, I feel like it's going to be so good. Not so much like it's going to be good now, and even when like maybe our kids or your daughter has grows up, because it's like you can see these things now and it can be relatable, and you don't have to feel, oh, you know, can't talk about this, because again, one of the main things we've all been through is feeling isolated, and that's not always a good thing, because you know, like you haven't chosen to be in the situation, but you can't help but it being isolated because of, you know, age or just so many different things, you know, and it just being a taboo in itself, not just amongst young people but amongst men, or you know, so many different things, you know. And you know, just briefly, I remember like we did like we wrote a few quotes for an article that was published last year, Father's Day, and I remember saying that for me, grief is like, I feel like we mourn for a season. Like the mourning stage is always like temporarily, you know, like however that looks like in terms of culture and stuff. But I feel like grief, people don't understand that grief is for a lifetime. But when you say that, I don't say that to be morbid or to say that you can't function. But it's the truth. Grief doesn't go away. Every day is just kind of manageable. Every day, you know, you deal with different. Like some people, like in my case, my way of dealing with this is to create a space for it where like it can be by itself. And initially, and it still is the case, it was started because we wanted to voice our grief. But you know, I'm not saying I'm like some sort of messiah, but I feel like it's for other people now. It's bigger than just me now. So that's what kind of keeps me going with it. And you know, because which I'll probably ask you guys, because I can understand like with grief, as much as it doesn't go away, but it can be mentally draining having to constantly think about things, or think about, you know, it's just kind of draining, and but unfortunately here we are. But it's just about managing it in different ways. And you know, one thing that I do kind of appreciate is people like sharing their stories, and you get to learn a lot about people and understand that, right, it's really tough, like, you know, even with your stories, like I've never you know, I was just like I just didn't know what to say. I was like, damn, you guys are doing a lot, and it must be a lot to take in, because, you know, even and I probably start with you, Imogen, because I understand there's grief, but there's also within grief, when that grief is caused, well, I don't want to say, I don't know if cause is the right word, but when that grief is associated with, you know, suicide, often can be even more alienating, because it's like people don't talk about that anyway, and it's like people don't know what to say. So like it's very hard. You know, so how did you, you know, losing your mum, how was that like for you, like given the, you know, the nature of her death?
Yeah, I mean, it was absolutely devastating is the best way I can put it. Back to what you said earlier, like storytelling and people sharing their stories, like there's so much power in that. And when it first happened to me, that's all I wanted to do, was just hear from other people who had gone through similar to what I'd gone through and survived, because it felt so unsurvivable for me. With suicide loss, like your world just is completely shattered, and I had no hope for the future. I'd just become a new mum, so my daughter was 9 months old at the time, so I was just kind of grappling with early motherhood anyway. So it was too much, way too much. And I knew I needed to survive for my child, which I think it was great that I had just become a new mum, because it gave me something to get up for in the mornings, and it gave me something to keep fighting for, and seeing, you know, a bit of joy in moments and things. But it's absolutely earth-shattering, and it's really complex. And I needed to hear other people's stories, like I said, but like there's so many complexities with suicide loss, like the added emotions that can come with it, like the guilt and the anger and all of these like really heavy emotions that can be so hard to process. So I spent a lot of time trying to deal with those things. So I found Good Mourning to be a lifesaver for me, to be honest. Like meeting Sal and starting the podcast gave me a focus. It gave me something to channel kind of all of my grief into, but in a really positive way. And it gave me a purpose. So at the same time as something so devastating is happening to me, I'm also finding what feels like my purpose in life, that's kind of energizing me at the same time. Like it's really kind of hard to describe, but yeah, it's been a very big learning thing for me. Yeah, it's been a lot.
No, I think that's it's nice to hear that it's giving you a sense of purpose. Because one thing that I picked up on, you know, when I was listening to your story, is the whole you know, having unanswered questions maybe, or thoughts of like, you know, why, if didn't, you know, because again, I think with again, I want to say this lightly, because I don't want to feel like I'm saying the wrong thing, but I feel like with suicide, it's often, when you hear of it, there is a like a reason, or there's some sort, I don't want to say justification, but there's a reason. So, you know, like in most cases, people leave notes, you know, but in your case, when there was, like, you know, I remember you saying it wasn't that you didn't really think nothing that was wrong, because she just, I mean, you spoke to her prior, and it was like something was wrong, but it wasn't, but you didn't think it was to the extent that, oh, like something's really wrong, and, you know, she doesn't want to be here. But so I don't know how, I don't, like, it must be hard, and I'm just trying to like articulate it myself. Like I feel like, I guess what I'm trying to say is how did you like how did you come to terms with that, knowing that, that there was no, like, in your, like in that case, there was no particular, like,
Reason.
yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know, yeah, like
Yeah.
it must leave you with a lot of like, but what, like, you know,
Oh yeah,
yeah,
like the if only game that you play with suicide loss is debilitating. I spent a lot of time there. I still dip in and out of that even 2 years into my grief. Yeah, my mum didn't leave a note, and she also didn't suffer from any previous mental health issues. So, prior to it happening to me, I kind of had this preconceived idea about suicide. It's like you've got to be really mentally ill and they're the only people that take their life, and it's not the case at all. Like, suicide doesn't discriminate, and I think that's what people really need to understand, is it can happen to anyone. If your circumstances change in your life or you lose hope for the future, like, anyone can end up in that place, which is really frightening. And the suicide rates are just way too high, especially for young men as well. Like, it's heartbreaking, and I think society doesn't quite understand suicide enough, and we don't deal with it very well. So there is a lot of stigma still attached to it too. But yeah, the if onlys, it's really hard because you have a cause of death, but you don't have a reason. Like, you can't ask that person now that they're gone. Like, I just wanted my mum to tell me why it happened, and I couldn't have her do that. So I spent a lot of time doing what is called like a psychological autopsy, where you sort of try and come up with it in your head. Like, you just go round and round, like ruminating, trying to come up with a reason as to why they're not here anymore. And it is absolutely exhausting. But I think it's very, very common for suicide loss survivors to go through that.
Yeah, like, so like, I know at the time, you said that you had that game of, well, not a game, so you had that thought of only, what if, but as in, how'd you deal with that now, in terms of like not allowing it to kind of get the better of you, in terms of like your anxiety, and just make you get down and get into this whole thinking game of, oh, what if, because it can get, I can imagine.
You get stuck. Yeah, you get really stuck in it. And I did get stuck in it for a long, long time. And it made me quite unwell. Like, mentally, I wasn't in a good place for a long time. But I think, the same as grief, as time goes on, parts of it start to become a bit more manageable. And I think you've got to go through it. I think you've got to go through all of those things so many times and kind of exhaust yourself and get to the point where you're like, I've been through every single possible scenario. It's not making me feel any better. It's not giving me the answers that I need. At some point, I need to kind of start moving forward with my life. And it takes a lot. Like, it's a constant battle, and it's constant work, and it's constant, like, looking after my mental health and exercise and meditation and all of those things that try and like kind of shut down those thoughts and make me feel a bit stronger and better. But yeah, it's a real battle. But I think, yeah, as time has progressed, I do find that aspect of my loss more manageable now, which is good, because I couldn't live in that place, that's for sure.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. And these are things that, when, because with grief, we don't choose choose grief, of course we don't. But like I said, like, we're all in this boat, but everyone has come together under different circumstances, like, and it is unfair. There's no kind of pretty way to put it. It is unfair, but it's just the way I see it. It's like everyone's dealing with the cards they've been dealt the best way they can, and it seems like that's what you both are doing, because like, just having to just always constantly like grieve, like you can't take a break from it. It's like, and it's taxing on this thing. I just want to just have a day where I don't think about things, but then you can't, because it's like every year you're reminded, whether that's through birthdays, milestones, or just something that may trigger that loss, and it's like, this is what we have to do until we're gone. So it's just about finding the best way every time to deal with it, and trying to constantly like psych yourself up. Okay, look, I know it's been rough, but it's a roller coaster. It's like kind of like how they say when at the stock market, up, down, up, that it's just this, you can't predict it sometimes. And I think that's the best way to look at it. Don't always try to kind of control it or have grip on everything, because you can't. Some things are going to be harder, some things are going to be easier. And I feel like, yes, sudden death is not, you're not prepared for that. It's, and like I said to you before, like, the timing of grief is just so, it doesn't care like whether we're excited about our 20s or 30s. Doesn't care if we're, in your case, or you just raising a young child. It doesn't care. That's what's so kind of cool about it. But it's kind of like like life as well. And the same way, like grief doesn't care when it comes in life. I won't say society doesn't care, but society still moves on. You know, like you guys,
Yeah.
it's like, you know, just move on, you know. But
And I think, you know, we're just not prepared for it because we don't talk about it in society. So when it happens to you, especially when you're in your 20s or even your early 30s, you know, you don't really think it's going to that you're going to be grieving. But even then, we just don't know what to do. And like it's something that we've spoken about on our podcast before, about when someone you love dies, it is so monumental and you feel like the world should stop because something, you know, and I don't know whether you felt like this, Jermaine, but like, you know, it feels like that everything should just stop and come to a standstill because like someone so important to you has just died. And then everyone else is just going about their day, like, you know, like not impact. And it's quite hard to get hard to get your head around because you're like, hang on a minute, like, you know, they've just died. But it's, that for me was like quite a big like shock when with sudden death, you know, it's like the world keeps turning when you feel like yours has stopped. And then you're like, well, what do I do now? You know, it's because like you said
Sal,
before,
like living on the other side of the world when her mum died suddenly, like that is just a whole nother experience that nobody should have to go through, is it, Sal?
Yeah, it's like literally, I think when you move to the other side of the world, you are prepared that, you know, you are away from your family. Like, you know, there are like definitely payoffs. There are sacrifices that you make, like living, you know, on the other side of the world. But one of the things I think, which is quite common when you're an expat, is you kind of think like, okay, what's the worst thing that could happen? And it, you know, it is kind of like, well, someone I love dies back home, like, and you kind of think, oh my God, could you imagine if that happened? Like, how would I cope? And then, yeah, sure enough, it did happen, and it's pretty bloody tough.
Yeah, because I was gonna ask about that because I can imagine, like, it's weird hearing, because when my mum passed, she wasn't in the country. So it's like we heard the news, you know, we were called, and I don't know how to kind of explain this, but I felt like it made me even more anxious because she was like, I don't know, it's just weird not being, like, it would still hurt if she was in the same country, but there's something about not being there. It just feels a bit, I don't know how to describe it. It feels
like a bit of a detachment in a way, or like a sort of just doesn't feel quite as real in a way.
Exactly.
I know, I feel that.
So I was going to ask you how in, you know, just in terms of going into your story of your mom's, was how like how did that make how did that make you feel? Because like just being on the other side of the world and having to just come back and like, so like not drastically but just on short notice, like how was that like for you?
Oh, it was like just mind bending, like, and because I hadn't seen my mum for about 2 years, because obviously being like on the other side of the world, it had been about 2 years since she'd been out to visit, and I think I was going to be, you know, planning to head home in a few months after she passed. So that was kind of weird because like, even though it's been 2 and a bit years since she has died, it's been like 4 years since I've seen her, if you know what I mean. But it was honestly like when I got the call, I woke up at like 6 a.m. I was getting ready to go to the gym, and I got this like WhatsApp to say, can you call me, from her partner. And so I sort of knew something was up because he never like messages me. And then, yeah, when he said like, you know, your mum's passed away, I just thought it was a joke. Like, I think my first like reaction was like, what the fuck? Are you joking? Like, just like what? And then from there, it was just like, okay, well, I need to get home because I've got a sibling, but he's autistic. So I knew it was on me to sort of get back and like sort everything out. And I basically spent that day trying to figure out, like, you know, okay, what flight can I get? Like, how, you know, all the logistics, where am I going to stay? All that stuff. But I, you know, 1 minute I was in Australia, like sunshine, hot, you know, it was November. So it was like summer here. And then the next minute I'm getting off a plane at Birmingham airport, like just shell shock, really. Like, yeah, it was just, it felt like I mean, that 24 hours just went in such a blur anyway. I was like, I've just got to get on this flight and I've just got to just try and get through it. But and then, like, as you probably know as well, like, there's so much admin that comes with death, right? And I feel like people don't talk about that as much, or you don't expect it. But like, I have never been so busy in my life. I literally felt like I had to project manage my mum's death because there was just so much to do. So I kind of like was like in this state of being like shell shocked back in the UK, like, you know, just not. And like, it sounds like there's not heaps of differences in terms of Australia and the UK, but because I've been out here for quite a while now, like even just things like driving a manual car again, and like just like trying to get my head around like little things, like cultural things that you just forget about, you know, you kind of thrown into sort of trying to readjust to being back somewhere, but then also trying to process the death and then sort everything out. It was on another level. Like, I look back at that time and I go, I just need a nap just thinking about it because it was so exhausting.